If 10 black SUVs surround your house before sunrise, do not assume they all came to save the same man. The first engine reached my driveway just before dawn. I stood frozen behind the living room curtain, still wearing the navy blue emergency scrubs from my overnight shift, while one black SUV after another rolled down the narrow gravel road leading to my small lakeside house outside Chicago. 1 became 3. 3 became 6. Within seconds, there were 10 identical vehicles parked in perfect formation, their headlights cutting through the morning mist rising from Lake Michigan. Men in dark suits stepped out quietly, each moving with practiced discipline. None of them shouted. None of them rushed. Somehow, that frightened me even more. They were not pointing weapons or causing panic. They simply surrounded the property as if they already knew exactly where every window and every door stood. Behind me, footsteps echoed softly across the wooden floor. I turned to see the man I had pulled from a sinking private jet only hours earlier. Julian stood with one hand resting against the bedroom doorway and the other instinctively protecting his abdomen beneath a clean gray sweatshirt I had found in my closet. His face remained pale from exhaustion, and despite the fresh bandages covering his shoulder and forehead, his silver-gray eyes stayed remarkably calm. He looked past me toward the line of SUVs outside before speaking in a steady voice that barely rose above a whisper. "Do not open the door." I looked back toward the vehicles. "Are they your people?" Julian answered without taking his eyes off the window. "Some of them are." My heartbeat quickened. "Then who are the others?" He finally met my gaze. "The ones who hope my child never takes a first breath." Every sound inside the house disappeared. Even the old wall clock seemed to stop ticking. My mind struggled to process everything that had happened during the past 6 hours. I had not planned to become involved in anyone else's life after finishing another demanding shift as an emergency room nurse. I had only wanted to drive home, shower, and sleep for a few hours before returning to the hospital that evening. Instead, I was standing inside my lakeside home beside a mysterious Alpha whose private jet had crashed into the freezing lake during the worst storm of the month, an Alpha whose condition had shocked me even more than the accident itself. As a medical professional, I trusted evidence more than rumors. Earlier that night, while checking his vital signs with portable equipment from my emergency kit, I had discovered something that should have been impossible to ignore. There had been another heartbeat. Small. Steady. Unmistakable. Julian had opened his eyes just long enough to realize what I had found before quietly asking me not to tell anyone. I had agreed because protecting a patient's privacy was part of my oath, even if nothing else about the situation made sense. Outside, another SUV pulled into the driveway, stopping slightly apart from the others. The men who had already arrived exchanged cautious glances instead of greeting the newcomers. Whatever divided them was invisible, but it was real. Julian noticed it immediately. "They are watching each other," he murmured. "That means no one knows who can still be trusted." Before I could ask another question, someone knocked gently on the front door. 3 slow knocks. Then silence. No shouting. No threats. Only patience. Julian took one careful step closer and lowered his voice even further. 6 hours earlier, he said, I believed the worst thing that could happen was my airplane falling into the lake. I was wrong. My thoughts raced back to the violent storm, the desperate rescue, and the impossible words he had spoken while drifting in and out of consciousness. I could still hear them as clearly as if they had been whispered only seconds ago. Save the baby first. Everything had begun with that single sentence, long before the first SUV ever reached my driveway. 6 hours earlier, the storm had swallowed almost every sound except the wind. My old pickup truck crawled along the narrow road beside Lake Michigan as sheets of rain crashed against the windshield hard enough to blur the world into gray shadows. I had just finished a 14-hour overnight shift at St. Gabriel Medical Center, and every part of me wanted nothing more than a hot shower and a few hours of sleep. Then a flash of light tore across the sky. At first I thought it was lightning. A second later, I realized it was an aircraft flying far too low over the water. The private jet tilted sharply to one side before disappearing behind a curtain of rain. A deep splash echoed across the lake, followed by complete silence. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. Training always defeated exhaustion. I pulled onto the shoulder, grabbed my emergency medical bag from the passenger seat, untied the small rescue boat secured behind my truck, and pushed it toward the shoreline. The freezing wind hit my face as I started the outboard motor and followed the trail of floating debris across the dark water. Pieces of polished white fuselage drifted between gentle waves while one blinking emergency light continued flashing through the rain. The aircraft had not completely sunk, but the nose had already disappeared beneath the surface. I climbed onto the damaged wing, opened the emergency hatch that had partially released during the impact, and slipped inside. Cold lake water reached nearly to my waist. Every movement had to be slow and deliberate. My flashlight revealed overturned seats, scattered luggage, and loose oxygen masks drifting with the current. Then I saw him. A tall man remained trapped near the rear cabin by a twisted section of metal and a damaged safety harness. Blood stained the sleeve of his expensive dark jacket, yet his breathing remained steady. More importantly, he was still conscious. His silver-gray eyes opened slightly as I reached him. Without asking who I was, he whispered only one sentence. "Save the baby first." I paused for the briefest moment, believing I had misunderstood him. There was no child anywhere inside the cabin. I carefully released the damaged harness, supported his shoulders, and guided him toward the open hatch before the rising water reached our chests. He lost consciousness only seconds after we climbed onto the wing. I secured him with a rescue strap before steering the small boat back toward shore as the private jet slowly disappeared beneath the lake behind us. By the time we reached my house, the storm had intensified again. I carried him inside, removed his soaked clothing with appropriate medical care to prevent hypothermia, covered him with clean blankets, treated the cuts across his shoulder and forehead, and connected the portable monitoring equipment I always kept at home because of my profession. His blood pressure remained lower than normal, but stable. His pulse gradually improved. As I completed the physical assessment, something unexpected caught my attention. Several clinical signs did not match the injuries from the crash alone. Maintaining complete professionalism, I retrieved the portable Doppler device from my emergency kit to rule out internal complications. The room filled with the quiet sound of one healthy heartbeat. Then another rhythm appeared beneath it. Smaller. Faster. Completely distinct. I stopped breathing for a second, adjusted the probe, and listened again. The second heartbeat remained steady. Medical training left no room for doubt. The alpha lying unconscious in my guest room was pregnant. Before I could process what that truly meant, his eyes opened halfway. He looked directly at me, then slowly toward the Doppler still resting in my hand. His expression showed neither surprise nor fear. Only resignation. In a tired voice barely stronger than the rain outside, he asked, "You heard it, did you not?" The quiet question lingered in the room longer than the sound of the Doppler itself. I slowly lowered the device and met his exhausted gaze. "Yes," I answered honestly. I heard 2 heartbeats. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Rain continued tapping against the windows while the fireplace filled the small lakeside house with gentle warmth. The man lying on my guest bed closed his eyes as if accepting something he had already feared would happen. When he opened them again, his expression remained calm despite the pain crossing his face. "Then I need you to promise me something," he said softly. "No one can know." As an emergency room nurse, protecting a patient's privacy was never a choice. It was part of the responsibility I accepted every day. I nodded once. "Everything you tell me stays between us unless someone's life depends on it." A faint trace of relief appeared in his eyes. "Thank you." I continued checking his pulse and blood pressure while speaking in the same calm voice I used with frightened patients. "You lost a significant amount of body heat in the lake. You also have a shoulder injury, several bruised ribs, and mild dehydration. Fortunately, I do not see signs of severe internal trauma, but both you and the baby need proper medical evaluation as soon as it is safe." He looked toward the rain-covered window instead of answering. "Safe," he repeated quietly. That is becoming a difficult word to define. I decided not to pressure him. Instead, I reached for a clean towel and carefully dried the remaining moisture from his hair before handing him a warm cup of water. He accepted it with steady hands despite his obvious fatigue. "May I at least know your name?" I asked. After a brief hesitation, he replied, "Julian." Nothing more. No last name. No explanation. I respected the boundary. "I am Ethan Parker." He gave a small nod. "I know." His answer surprised me. Before I could ask what he meant, he slowly drifted back to sleep. I quietly organized the medical supplies scattered across the bedside table before returning to the soaked clothing I had placed near the laundry room. Standard procedure required checking personal belongings for identification that might help emergency responders contact family members. Yet nothing made sense. There was no driver's license. No passport. No wallet. Every clothing label had been professionally removed. Even the expensive wristwatch carried only a serial number instead of a recognizable brand. While lifting the heavy jacket, I felt something hidden inside the lining. Carefully opening a damaged seam, I discovered a small metallic device no larger than a house key. It blinked with a faint green light every few seconds. It was not medical equipment. It looked more like a tracking transmitter. My heartbeat quickened. Why would someone hide a tracking device inside a jacket unless they expected to be followed? I placed it inside a metal storage box to reduce any possible signal before returning to the bedroom. Julian remained asleep, but his breathing had become noticeably calmer. I adjusted the blanket around him and glanced once more at the portable monitor, confirming 2 steady heartbeats. Just then, headlights swept across my living room wall. I instinctively turned off the bedside lamp and looked through a narrow gap in the curtain. Far across the lake, beyond the trees lining my property, a dark boat drifted silently through the morning mist without navigation lights. It was moving far too slowly to be searching for survivors. Instead, it appeared to be searching for one specific shoreline. A few moments later, the boat stopped completely, and someone inside lifted what looked like binoculars toward my house. Before I could step away from the window, Julian's eyes opened again. Without even looking outside, he spoke in a calm voice that carried absolute certainty. "They found the lake much faster than I expected. Whatever you do next, Ethan, do not call anyone until you know which side they belong to." Julian's warning settled over the room like the storm clouds still hanging above the lake. I remained beside the window, carefully watching the silent boat drifting beyond the shoreline. Whoever was inside showed no interest in searching the water for survivors. They were studying my house instead. Years of working in emergency medicine had taught me to recognize the difference between urgency and patience. Rescue teams moved quickly because every second mattered. These people moved slowly because they believed time was already on their side. I stepped away from the curtain and lowered my voice. "If they are looking for you, we should contact the Coast Guard or the local sheriff." Julian slowly pushed himself upright against the headboard, immediately placing one protective hand over his abdomen before answering. "If you call the wrong person, neither of us will have enough time to explain." I looked at him carefully. His breathing remained steady, but the effort of simply sitting upright reminded me that he still needed rest more than answers. "Then help me understand," I said. "Who exactly is searching for you?" He remained silent for several moments before finally speaking. "People who believe the crash solved all of their problems." His words only deepened the mystery. I walked into the kitchen, prepared another glass of water, and returned with fresh pain medication that was safe according to the emergency treatment guidelines I carried in my medical kit. Julian accepted both with a quiet nod of appreciation. "You continue helping me even though you have every reason to send me away," he observed. I offered a tired smile. "You are my patient until someone else can safely take over." Something softened in his normally guarded expression. Before either of us could continue, 3 gentle knocks echoed from the front door. They were calm, evenly spaced, almost polite. I instinctively froze. Julian's eyes immediately shifted toward the entrance. "Do not answer yet," he said. Instead of approaching the door, I quietly moved to the side window where I could see the front porch without being noticed. Two men wearing dark raincoats stood outside. One held a small waterproof folder while the other kept both hands visible in front of him. Their posture looked professional rather than aggressive, but something felt wrong. The folder carried the emblem of a private aviation company instead of any emergency response agency. One of the men called through the closed door in a friendly voice. "Sir, we are assisting with the aircraft accident reported overnight. We are checking nearby homes for possible survivors." His explanation sounded reasonable. Too reasonable. I thought back to the crash. No official rescue teams had seen me bring Julian ashore because the storm had completely hidden the shoreline. There was no logical reason anyone would begin their search at my isolated house instead of the crash site. I quietly returned to the bedroom. "They say they are looking for survivors." Julian gave a faint shake of his head. "Ask them which runway the aircraft departed from." Confused but trusting his instincts, I remained behind the locked door and repeated the question. Silence followed. Several long seconds passed before the man outside answered. "We are still confirming those details." Julian closed his eyes briefly. "They are lying. Every person connected to that flight knew exactly where it departed." My heartbeat quickened. The men outside had asked about survivors without knowing the most basic information about the aircraft they claimed to be investigating. Before I could react, the electricity inside the house suddenly failed. Every light disappeared at once. The refrigerator fell silent. Only the soft sound of rain remained. Across the dark living room, the small metal box containing the hidden tracking device began flashing bright red through the narrow opening in its lid, pulsing once every second like a beacon announcing that our hiding place had finally been found. The red light continued pulsing inside the small metal box, casting brief flashes across the darkened living room. I carefully picked it up, studying the hidden transmitter through the narrow opening in the lid. It was dormant until the power failed, I whispered. Julian slowly stood despite the pain in his shoulder, one hand instinctively supporting the edge of the bed while the other rested protectively over his abdomen. "Someone outside activated it," he said quietly. "They knew exactly what signal to send." Before I could answer, a different sound echoed from beyond the front yard. Powerful engines approached from the opposite direction of the lake road. One after another, large black SUVs emerged through the morning fog, their headlights cutting across the rain-soaked trees. I counted them almost without realizing it. 1, 3, 5, 8, 10. Every vehicle stopped with remarkable precision along the gravel driveway. The two men who had been knocking on my front door immediately stepped back instead of greeting the newcomers. Even from inside the house, I could sense the sudden tension between the two groups. Nobody rushed forward. Nobody shouted. Everyone seemed to be waiting for someone else to make the first move. Julian quietly looked through the edge of the curtain. "Now we discover who survived the crash with their loyalty intact," he murmured. The driver of the lead SUV opened his door and stepped into the rain. He was a broad-shouldered man in his early 40s wearing a charcoal suit beneath a long black coat. Unlike everyone else, he carried no visible umbrella despite the steady rain. He calmly walked toward the porch while the other suited men remained beside their vehicles. When he reached the front steps, he stopped several feet away from the entrance and spoke in a clear, respectful voice. "Boss, this is Marcus Reed. We have secured the area." Julian remained silent. Marcus continued without moving closer. "Dr. Lawson is with us. Your medical team is ready. We will not enter unless you give permission." I glanced toward Julian. "You know him?" Julian nodded once. "Marcus has protected my family for more than 15 years. Before I could unlock the door, another voice came from near the road. "Do not trust them." Every head outside turned toward a silver sedan that had quietly stopped several yards behind the SUVs. An older man wearing a white medical coat stepped into the rain, holding both hands where everyone could see them. "Julian," he called calmly, "I am Henry Lawson. If Marcus truly found you first, ask him what medication I prescribed before your flight." Julian's expression changed almost imperceptibly. He spoke just loudly enough for Marcus to hear. "Answer him." Marcus replied immediately. "You refused the stronger medication because it could increase fatigue during travel. Dr. Lawson adjusted the dosage at 11:30 yesterday morning." The older physician smiled with visible relief. "That answer is correct." Only then did Julian release a slow breath. He is telling the truth. I unlocked the front door but kept the safety chain secured. Marcus did not step forward. Instead, he lowered himself onto one knee in the rain. Every suited man behind him followed without hesitation. "Boss," Marcus said respectfully, "welcome home." My mind struggled to absorb what I was witnessing. The injured alpha I had pulled from a sinking jet was not simply an anonymous passenger hiding from unknown enemies. He was someone powerful enough that 10 luxury SUVs, a trusted physician, and dozens of loyal men had crossed the state before sunrise searching for him. I slowly turned toward Julian, still trying to understand the man standing inside my modest lakeside house. Before I could speak, Marcus looked directly at me and said with sincere gratitude, "Sir, there is something you deserve to know. The life you saved last night belongs to Julian Moretti, the head of the Moretti family. And because you protected both him and his unborn child, every person standing outside considers your safety our highest priority." Marcus remained kneeling outside until Julian quietly unlatched the safety chain and opened the front door. Rain drifted gently across the porch as the two men looked at one another without speaking. Respect, relief, and responsibility passed silently between them before Marcus finally stood. He did not rush inside. Instead, he waited for Julian to step aside and invite him in. That single gesture told me everything I needed to know about the balance of trust between them. Dr. Henry Lawson entered next, carrying a compact medical case rather than the urgency I expected. He greeted me with a grateful nod before walking directly toward Julian. "May I examine you?" he asked. Julian answered with a simple nod. I remained nearby, handing Dr. Lawson the notes I had recorded throughout the night, including Julian's temperature, blood pressure, pulse, oxygen level, and the fetal heartbeat I had detected with my portable Doppler. The older physician studied my handwriting with visible appreciation. "These observations are remarkably thorough," he said. "You helped stabilize both patients before we arrived." I smiled politely. "I simply followed emergency protocol." Dr. Lawson carefully performed another examination while Marcus quietly coordinated with the men outside. A few minutes later, the physician placed his stethoscope back into the medical case and looked toward Julian with a reassuring expression. "The baby remains stable. Considering the aircraft accident, this is better than I expected." Relief briefly softened every face in the room. Then Dr. Lawson lowered his voice. "However, someone knew exactly which flight you would take, exactly when you would depart, and exactly who was traveling with you." Marcus nodded grimly. Only 6 people had access to the complete itinerary. Julian remained silent for several thoughtful seconds before asking the question everyone feared. "How many of those 6 are still alive?" Marcus answered honestly. "After the crash, only 4. The room fell quiet. Dr. Lawson carefully closed the medical case before adding another unsettling detail. Only those same 6 people also knew about the pregnancy. I instinctively looked toward Julian. The realization settled heavily inside me. The aircraft had not simply encountered terrible weather. Someone had known about both the flight and the unborn child long before the jet reached the lake. Marcus unfolded a waterproof folder and spread several photographs across my dining table. They showed the damaged aircraft before takeoff, maintenance records, and a close-up image of a small electronic component recovered from the wreckage. Our investigators found evidence that the emergency navigation system had been deliberately disabled, Marcus explained calmly. The pilot attempted to compensate, but visibility disappeared once the storm intensified. Julian studied the photographs without visible emotion. "An accident arranged to resemble bad luck," he said quietly. Dr. Lawson nodded. "That is our conclusion as well." While they continued discussing the investigation, my attention drifted toward the hidden tracking device still resting inside the metal storage box. Something about it continued bothering me. I carefully removed it and placed it beside the aircraft photographs. Marcus immediately recognized it. "This transmitter should never have been inside your clothing, boss." Julian looked at the device with narrowed eyes. "It was sewn into my jacket after I boarded the aircraft. I checked everything before leaving home." Marcus exchanged a troubled glance with Dr. Lawson. Then the person responsible had direct access after departure. Another layer of trust quietly collapsed inside the room. Before anyone could continue, my portable Doppler emitted a gentle notification from the nearby chair where I had left it charging. Without thinking, I picked it up and confirmed the familiar steady rhythm. The tiny heartbeat remained strong. Julian watched the monitor in complete silence before looking toward me. "You heard that heartbeat before anyone from my family arrived," he said softly. "From this moment forward, Ethan, you are no longer simply the man who rescued me. You are the only outsider alive who knows the truth before the traitor does, and that makes you part of this whether either of us wanted it or not." After Julian's words settled over the room, the atmosphere inside my quiet lakeside house changed completely. Only a few hours earlier, I had believed I was helping an injured stranger survive a terrible accident. Now I understood that every decision I made could affect not only his recovery but also the future of the unborn child whose heartbeat I had heard with my own medical equipment. Marcus stepped outside to organize security while several of his trusted team members quietly positioned themselves around the property. No one blocked the neighbors or created unnecessary attention. Instead, they remained respectful, blending into the peaceful lakeside community as much as possible. Through the front window, I noticed they communicated mostly with brief hand signals and discreet radios. Whatever organization Julian led, discipline clearly mattered more than intimidation. Dr. Lawson reviewed my handwritten notes one final time before carefully placing them into his medical folder. "Your observations may become important later," he said. "Please keep your original copies." I nodded and stored the notebook inside my desk drawer. As I closed it, my eyes landed on an old framed photograph of my late brother wearing the same emergency rescue jacket I still kept hanging beside the front door. He had always believed that saving one life could quietly change dozens of others. Looking back at Julian, I began to wonder whether that lesson was unfolding in ways neither of us could have imagined. A light knock interrupted my thoughts. Marcus returned inside carrying a tablet computer. "Boss," he said respectfully, "our team searched the crash site again after sunrise. We recovered additional debris from the aircraft." He placed several high-resolution photographs on the dining table. Most showed damaged sections of the cabin, but one image immediately caught my attention. A medical storage compartment had been opened before the crash, and several emergency medication containers were missing. Dr. Lawson leaned closer to the screen. "Those supplies should have remained sealed throughout the flight." Julian looked toward Marcus. "Was anything else unusual?" Marcus enlarged another photograph showing the cockpit doorway. The maintenance inspection confirmed the navigation failure was deliberate. However, investigators also found evidence that someone entered the medical compartment before takeoff. Dr. Lawson folded his arms thoughtfully. "That means the sabotage involved more than flying conditions. Whoever planned this expected a medical emergency as well." Silence settled across the room. I found myself thinking like a nurse rather than an investigator. If someone expected medical complications, I said carefully, then they understood Julian's condition better than an ordinary mechanic ever could. Both Marcus and Dr. Lawson looked at me at the same time. Marcus slowly nodded. "That limits the number of possible suspects even further." Julian remained remarkably calm despite everything we had learned. He turned toward me with the same steady expression I had seen when I first pulled him from the freezing lake. "Ethan, I need to ask something difficult." I waited quietly. "Until we discover who betrayed us, would you continue monitoring the pregnancy?" The request surprised me. "Dr. Lawson is here. He is far more qualified than I am." The older physician smiled gently. "I specialize in long-term care. You were the first medical professional to evaluate Julian after the crash. You already know his baseline condition, and he clearly trusts you. Julian added one simple sentence. So do I. Before I could answer, one of Marcus's security officers entered from the porch carrying a sealed evidence bag recovered from the shoreline. Inside rested a folded piece of waterproof paper. Marcus carefully opened it and unfolded the damp page across the table. Written in bold black ink was a single sentence. It did not contain a name, a signature, or any explanation. It simply read, "The rescue changed nothing. We still know where the heir is." No one spoke. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, but for the first time since the crash, the silence felt even more unsettling than the storm. The anonymous message remained on my dining table long after everyone had finished reading it. No signature. No fingerprints visible. Only a calm sentence written with unsettling confidence. The rescue changed nothing. We still know where the heir is. Marcus immediately instructed 2 members of his security team to examine every inch of the property while another group quietly reviewed the security cameras installed around the surrounding roads. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody acted recklessly. Their professionalism reminded me more of a well-trained emergency response unit than anything I had expected. Julian remained seated beside the living room window, watching the calm surface of the lake that had nearly claimed his life only hours before. Dr. Lawson completed another routine examination and smiled with cautious optimism. Your vital signs remain stable, and the baby's heartbeat continues to be strong, he reported. Julian thanked him with a slight nod before looking toward me. That is because Ethan acted quickly. I felt slightly embarrassed by the compliment. I only did what any nurse would have done. Julian gently shook his head. Not everyone would have climbed into freezing water during a storm. Before I could respond, Marcus returned carrying a tablet connected to the security team's surveillance system. Boss, we have reviewed the cameras along every access road leading here. He placed the device on the coffee table where all of us could see the footage. Several delivery trucks, local residents, and emergency vehicles appeared throughout the morning, but one image caught everyone's attention. A maintenance van had slowly driven past my house nearly an hour before sunrise. It never stopped, yet its roof-mounted camera remained pointed directly toward the property the entire time. Marcus enlarged the image. The license plate belongs to a company that closed almost 3 years ago. Dr. Lawson folded his arms thoughtfully. Then someone deliberately used a false identity. I leaned closer to the screen. Something about the driver seemed familiar, although I could not explain why. Before I could study the image further, my cell phone vibrated inside my pocket. The caller identification displayed the emergency department where I worked. I answered immediately. My nursing supervisor sounded relieved to hear my voice. She explained that investigators had contacted every local hospital asking whether anyone had treated survivors from an unidentified aircraft accident. I answered truthfully without revealing Julian's identity. I simply explained that I was taking a personal day after an exhausting overnight shift. She accepted the explanation without hesitation before reminding me to call if I needed additional time away from work. After ending the call, I realized something important. The hospitals already know an aircraft went down, I said. That information became public much faster than I expected. Marcus nodded. Which means anyone searching official channels now knows local medical staff may have encountered survivors. Julian quietly looked toward the window again. Then remaining here becomes increasingly risky for Ethan. I immediately disagreed. Leaving too soon could be just as dangerous if someone is already watching the roads. Dr. Lawson smiled approvingly. That is exactly how emergency planning should work. We evaluate options instead of reacting emotionally. Marcus unfolded a regional map across the table. Several routes leading away from the lake had already been marked. We prepared 3 possible destinations, he explained. However, none of them should be chosen until we identify which information has remained secure. Julian studied the map for a long moment before placing his finger on my house instead of any destination. We stay here today, he decided calmly. Whoever sent that message expects us to panic. We will not reward their patience with predictable decisions. Just then, one of the security officers entered carrying a small waterproof envelope recovered beneath my mailbox during the latest property search. Inside was a single photograph taken from a distance. It showed me standing on the wing of the sinking aircraft during the rescue, long before sunrise, proving someone had watched the entire rescue operation from the darkness across the lake without ever revealing their presence. The photograph remained in my hands long after everyone else had finished examining it. The image had been taken from somewhere across the lake during the storm, capturing the exact moment I reached for Julian while the damaged aircraft slowly disappeared beneath the dark water. Whoever had taken it had not attempted to help. They had simply watched. Marcus carefully placed the photograph inside an evidence sleeve before looking toward Julian. "Boss, whoever followed the flight also followed the rescue. That means they know Ethan was never part of our organization." Julian remained thoughtful for several moments before quietly answering, "Which also means Ethan became a target only after choosing to save a stranger." Hearing those words unsettled me more than I expected. I had never imagined that one emergency rescue could alter the direction of my entire life. Dr. Lawson gently closed his medical case after completing one final examination. His reassuring smile returned as he looked at Julian. "Both you and the baby remain stable. Stress is still the greatest concern, but physically you are recovering remarkably well." Julian thanked him before turning toward me. "You never asked why I was traveling alone." I shook my head. "You were my patient before you were anything else." A faint smile appeared on his face for what felt like the first time since I had pulled him from the lake. "That is exactly why I wanted to find you." The room fell silent. Marcus looked surprised but did not interrupt. Julian slowly reached into the inside pocket of the clean jacket Marcus had brought him and removed a sealed waterproof envelope that had survived the crash. Inside was a single medical report bearing my full name. I stared at it in disbelief. "Why do you have my employment record?" I asked quietly. Julian answered with complete honesty. "Several months ago, Dr. Lawson began searching for medical professionals experienced in emergency trauma care, water rescue, and maternal health. Your name appeared repeatedly because of your work, your certifications, and your reputation for putting patients before yourself." Dr. Lawson nodded. "We intended to invite you to join a charitable medical foundation funded by the Moretti family. The meeting was scheduled for the morning after the flight." I slowly looked from the report to Julian. "So the aircraft was coming here before the crash?" "Yes," Julian replied. "The storm changed the route, but not the destination." Every unanswered question from the past several hours suddenly fit together. I had not been chosen because of fate alone. Julian had already intended to meet me, yet neither of us could have predicted that our first conversation would happen beside a sinking aircraft in the middle of a storm. Marcus received a quiet message through his earpiece and listened carefully before smiling with visible relief. The investigators confirmed that the anonymous maintenance van has been located. It was abandoned several miles away with false registration documents. Whoever used it has already disappeared, but they left behind electronic records that may identify everyone involved in the sabotage. Julian nodded calmly. "Then the truth has finally begun moving toward us instead of away from us." Morning sunlight slowly broke through the remaining clouds, filling the living room with warm golden light for the first time since the storm. The security teams outside relaxed slightly as neighbors resumed their ordinary routines along the quiet lakeside road. For the first time all day, the house felt like a home again instead of a temporary refuge. I picked up the portable Doppler one last time and listened carefully. The tiny heartbeat remained steady and strong, filling the room with quiet reassurance. Julian looked at me, then at the sunlight reflecting across the lake where we had first met. "You saved 2 lives without knowing either of our names," he said softly. I smiled and handed him the Doppler so he could hear the steady rhythm for himself. Sometimes the first choice we make for a stranger becomes the beginning of an entirely new future. Outside, the 10 black SUVs slowly departed one by one, leaving only a single vehicle waiting at the end of the driveway. It was no longer there to surround my house. It was there to accompany 2 lives, and 1 small heartbeat, toward whatever tomorrow would bring.